Welcome back. We're in our third installment of our interview with Karen White of Divine Time Astrology, our look at relationships in astrology. So welcome back, Karen. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Ryan.
Okay. And today we're going to look at how do you work with someone when you see a chart that say they want to know about relationships, they want to know when I'm going to be in relationships, when is it going to happen? But you look at the chart and you notice the first thing is, wow, they don't really have good capacity for relationships, first of all. And second of all, if they do, maybe that transit or that dasha doesn't occur until 9 years down the road. How do you help an individual who might be in a situation like that?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, first of all, the fact that they want relationship enough to come to an astrologer and ask about it is a good sign. That means that they're willing to do whatever it is that they need to do to make it more possible. And or they'll find that after a while of working with themselves, and working with the things in the chart that indicate that relationship is not really their main focus this lifetime, then they can let go of their idea of having, whatever their ideals are regarding having a relationship, and then just accept what they have.
Mm-hmm.
And even if marriage isn't something that's shown in the relationship. Like I had a client where it wasn't just one or two things. It was, like 5 or 6 things that said no, no, no. And yet the person still wanted relationship.
Was there an indication in the chart as to why? Do you know what I mean? Like, so even though there were all those bad things, what part of the chart, if you can remember, might have indicated this great focus on relationships? You understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, I do. I've noticed sometimes that, most people tend to go with their strengths. That's what I spend the most time on. I've also seen the opposite of that, where somebody will work really hard on their most debilitated planet. And I think that sometimes when a chart is saying no to relationship, or at least obstacles and difficulties, that the soul has set it up for them to, that is the impediment, that's the motivation for growing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the carrot sort of thing.
So you look at the chart and you see those difficulties, but then for you, that gives you a sense of, all right, this is where they need to work on, or where they need to develop, or where they need to focus so that they can move in that direction.
Yeah, that and wherever Rahu is.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's almost always connected to that. I've noticed that. I've noticed that Rahu in water signs have to do with developing your emotional security regardless of your circumstances.
Okay.
And if you have a lot of impediments in your chart towards relationship, it doesn't mean you can't have love. It just means that the kind of love that you have is not going to fit any idealized version of it. Because the ideal is you find somebody, you're with somebody who gets you totally, and you get them on every level. You share everything together. You stay together till you die. And, you're blissfully happy all the time. I mean, there's just the ideals that we have around love are, they're talking about some other reality, which has a lot more to do with our relationship with the divine than with humans. And
so the problem might not necessarily be that they aren't able to get in relationships. It might be that they just have such insane expectations that they never stay in a relationship, or like they don't. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. Or that, not necessarily that they do so much, maybe have those expectations, is that society, or, the way we grow up, everything that we hear, our identity is tied up in whether or not we have a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've had several women, for instance, Hindu women, Indian women, who are very, when am I going to get married already? And I've learned to ask, well, is this something that you want? Or is it the pressure that you're getting from your family and from your culture?
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I've had several tell me, well, I don't know if I really want to, but my mother, it would make her so happy.
Right.
And which is always interesting to me because I thought that in India, that astrology had a totally different, function in society, and that once the astrologer said, well, this girl, she's here for other things, not for, to be a wife first and foremost. And then they would just accept that and then, leave her alone.
Well, I think that's the ideal, right? Because that also goes with the caste system. Ideally, we should be able to determine our caste from our chart.
Right.
So it's not that we were born into a servant family or we were born into a warrior family. It's that the astrologer should be able to look at the chart and say, no, this person's meant to be looking at knowledge, a Brahmin, or this person's meant to be a politician or a ruler, a kshatriya. But, so that kind of goes along with the same thing in that ideally, that's probably how it could be practiced in an enlightened culture. But as we see, in the time period that we're in, we're not quite as enlightened, which means we manipulate it to what we want.
Yeah.
So that's the hard part. But anyway, we got a little off track there. But so that's good. So one other question I do have about that is that when you are looking at relationships in a person's chart, I would say, what are some indications for good capacity for a relationship? But I'm not going to, because what I found is that if someone has indications for a good capacity in a relationship, that's probably not going to be something that they're going to bring up, correct?
Well, yeah, and they don't come to you.
Right.
Because they don't need you.
Right, exactly. It's the same thing with money or anything else. If someone has a lot of money, they're not going to come to you and say, how am I going to get a lot of money? Whatever it might be. So one thing I'd be curious about is, what are some indications of difficult capacity? We've touched on this a little bit, but what are some indications for difficult capacity to be in a relationship? And do you have any examples of how you might say, all right, you have this difficulty, the capacity might not be there, but here's how you can work on it? Are there any particular things you can think of?
The real obvious ones, like Venus, the moon with Rahu.
Okay.
I've noticed that the moon is, the more afflictions to the moon, the more difficulties with relationship, especially for women. And I noticed that K2 causes a lot more problems than you would expect also. And especially in Rahu moon, that is really hard.
Okay.
And what I recommend for that is always a journaling practice, just because it can really help you to focus the mind like nothing else can. Mm-hmm. And Moon Rahu is such a turbulent energy that even meditation is really hard for a person. And doing a writing meditation, stream of consciousness writing, doing that on a regular basis, something else that's really hard for Moon Rahu people, mm-hmm. but nevertheless, it's something to keep returning to, will really help the person to start to feel more grounded in themselves. And it's the lack of grounding that makes relationships so hard.
I see.
Okay. And they're just all over the place. And emotionally speaking, because it's Rahu, the dragon's head, they can be prone to emotional extremes.
Which makes it hard to be in a relationship.
It does, men tend to not like that.
Why? Why would they not like that?
Because it's scary. I've noticed something interesting. I've seen this at least 3 or 4 times now in my practice. I've seen couples who both have Moon Rahu conjunctions be together with each other. And be together with each other for a long time. Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting?
It is. So would you say with the Moon Rahu conjunction, if someone has that who's watching and they're in a relationship, one thing they might need to do is work on either not being so extreme or kind of realizing that their emotional exuberance might not necessarily be well taken by their partners or their spouses. Is that?
Yeah, and that really what they need to do is work on their own mind. Because that's what Rahu at the moon is about. Is it means that this is the planet that's under construction this lifetime.
Right.
Since it's the mind, it's the ego, it's the emotions. Therapy, I recommend therapy. I think therapy is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only situation where once a week for about an hour, you have a trained, skilled person who is listening to you and only you.
Right.
And, you know, the moon Rahu conjunction indicates that on some level, when the person was a child, they weren't able to get that mirroring that mothers give to their children. Like the mother could be, you know, there's just so many things that it could be. Now, just remember, this is the other thing that's fascinating about astrology that I think psychology doesn't understand, and that is when a person is born, the planets, everything's already in place to indicate things like, well, okay, you were abused by your parents, or your parents weren't available, they were having such a really difficult time in life, or whatever that is. So it's like you came into this situation. Mm-hmm. It was something that you chose. So there's really no point in thinking that if you'd only had different parents, or if you'd only been, you know, that you were a victim of what happened to you when you were growing up, that kind of thinking is really counterproductive.
Right.
And it really almost doesn't matter why. Mm-hmm. The important thing is that you came in with it, it's in your chart, and you're going to be dealing with it in one way or another anyway.
Right.
So, yes, therapy.
Yeah.
Therapy is really excellent for that. And not just the one-on-one, though, but group therapy seems to be especially effective because you're getting mirroring not from just one person, but from many.
Right. And
you get to see and know yourself. Mm-hmm. That's what it is. You don't see yourself. You don't know who you are.
Right. So part of the Rahu moon is finding yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And that the deeper and more committed relationship you have to yourself, the better you can be in relationship.
Right.
Knowing your limitations, you got to know your limitations. Mm-hmm. When you feel yourself starting to get, crazy, mm-hmm. If the only discipline you need to have is to be able to say to your partner, I'm going to have to get back to you later.
Right. Yeah.
And then just go away mm-hmm. until you can get yourself under control. And then there's the writing thing again. Mm-hmm. You can write about it. And hopefully you have like friends that you have support. You can call them and talk about it. If you have a therapist, you can talk about it. Whatever it is you need to do, before you come and, chop off your partner's head.
Right. Right. Okay.
Or assume, something paranoid is true. Some paranoid you have is true.
Good. Okay. Well, that's excellent. So let's finish up with one more question for today. And that is, what are, obviously astrology can tell us many things about ourselves. So in your mind, what might be some of the limits of astrology in regards to relationships? What might be an unrealistic expectation that people might have of an astrologer? And what would be a more realistic way of looking at how we can understand relationships through astrology?
Okay. Wow. Okay, that was like too many.
Okay, I'm sorry. Let's back up. What are the limitations? What are the limitations that?
The limitations of astrology.
Yeah, for relationships specifically.
For relationships specifically. Well, like I said, just having good compatibility with somebody is not enough. You also need to have timing. The timing has to be right. You need to have capacity, a decent, good enough capacity.
For relationships.
For relationship, right. And sometimes, even that isn't enough. Yes, having good compatibility is not an excuse, I guess you could say, for being badly behaved in a relationship. And thinking that, the relationship can take tons of testing, or it can take not being attended to, that it can take being verbally abusive or being neglectful or any of those things that would ruin any relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not enough to have, the blessing from the universe, like having Mahendra or magnetic attraction. I mean, these things help, of course, but there's a responsibility. There needs to be a sense of responsibility to the relationship and to your partner, where you keep growing as a person and you keep attending to the relationship. That you see it like kind of like a house plant. If you don't water it, right, it's going to die.
Yeah.
So that is a big one.
So overall, it's that you can see the compatibility between people. You could see an individual's capacity to have relationships. You can even see when is or isn't a good time, but that doesn't take away from the fact that you still need to be interactive and do the appropriate things to support and sustain a relationship.
Exactly.
Okay, good.
So education, and I personally feel like we have a duty to make ourselves as happy as possible. And I mean men and women, because a woman can be a really happy person, but if she's with a man who doesn't enjoy being a man, he doesn't have respect for himself, he hates what he does for a living, sooner or later, it's going to ruin the relationship, because it's just a drag to be around it.
Right.
It really is. So
that also shows that astrologically we can see the other areas of life that that just impact our relationship and our capacity to relate.
Yeah, and also too, we're not the same person our whole life. Depending on what dasa planet is in play, depending on the time period that we're in, like the planetary periods,
right,
that we're talking about.
Right.
And what's going on with the partner too, because the partner could go into a difficult dasa period.
Right.
And so much of their energy is suddenly taken up with whatever is in play in their chart. And if you have a good foundation and you have some routines in your relationship to help maintain it, then you'll have a better chance of getting through that time period and actually being a support to your partner instead of one more thing that they have to take care of.
Right.
So, I think that there needs to be a lot of, emotional independence,
Right.
That you're trying to say.
So you have to be strong in yourself, essentially.
Yeah, that's your main relationship, and that's what your main responsibility is a relationship to yourself.
Right. Which is also excellent for astrology because it can tell you how to work that out.
Yeah.
That's good. Good. Okay, well, good. Well, we'll go ahead and conclude there for today. And I just want to take a moment one more time to let people know that you are available for sessions. Oftentimes you might have written to me and you've seen that I've referred you to Karen. So she's an excellent astrologer. We've done a lot of good work together. But Karen, go ahead and tell us one more time how people can get in contact with you and remind us of the...
the gift.
Yes, that's right.
Right. Okay. You can, my website is Divine Time Astrology, DIVINE, timeastrology.com. And you can reach me through email at Karen, Karen, at divinetimeastrology.com, or call me on the phone, 714-754-6443, though I prefer email because I look at my email several times a day, but I forget about the phone. So there's that. And there will be or Ryan will have available, there's a PDF download that I put together of my 6 favorite relationship recommendations. And they're just resources for relationships.
Okay.
And, I think of them as education that are especially effective.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Karen. It was wonderful to talk to you and finally have the in-person video interaction versus our normal MP3 or what was it we used to do? The podcast. That's right. That's right.
Podcasting, yes.
The podcasts, which are also available on Karen's site, those podcasts with myself and with many other astrologers. So thank you very much. And it was a pleasure to speak with you.
You too. Thank you, Ryan. Bye.
Bye.